Hello and welcome back to Mondo Musings. I'm your presenter, Nicardo McLean. Now, even prior to his scintillating and then world-leading 999 performance in the Class 1 Boys 100 meters at Champs on March 29th, high school ace Bouwahjgie Nkrumie was already expressing confidence about his chances of making the team to the World Champs in Budapest in August. Now, unfortunately, as most will know, the fast rising sprinter suffered a hamstring injury while competing in the heats of the under 20 boys 100-meter event at the Carifta Games in the Bahamas on the weekend. And this injury is expected, based on the initial reporting, to keep him on the sidelines for up to a month. So naturally, it's a case of fingers crossed and prayers up that he'll heal fully, first and foremost, and then be able to regain or even exceed the form he demonstrated at Champs once he returns to training. Now, one of the things that makes Bouwahjgie Nkrumie's injection into a potential 100-meter final at Senior Nationals in June so exciting is the fact that he has such an explosive start. An explosive start that will not only, obviously, impact positively his prospects of finishing in the top 3 or the top 6 to make the relay squad to Budapest, but also the potential effect that that start could have on the race plans and the execution of his more senior competitors. And it caused me to think about situations in the past where guys, youngsters with incredibly fast starts, have stepped up and challenged the big boys. And one of the most prominent examples, and this one is of a recent vintage, relatively recent anyway, is that showdown at the 2017 World Championships in the 100 meters between Usain Bolt, undoubtedly the greatest short sprinter on the men's side in the history of athletics, and Christian Coleman, the 2019 World 100-meter champion, who was at the time only 21 years old, but had that explosive race-altering start. Christian Coleman, as always, got out of the blocks, was into his running, and was putting incredible pressure on Bolt. And I think, this is just my personal view here, the start that Christian Coleman got was what threw Bolt off even more. Obviously, we knew his preparation coming into the championships wasn't the greatest. A lot of injury setbacks. There were issues in terms of the passing of his good friend Jermaine Mason. There were all of those issues, a confluence of problems that affected him in the lead up. But I do think that that start was the thing that really threw the monkey wrench into the works for Usain Bolt. I mean, you look at clips of the race, slow motion clips of the race, and he is straining every sinew, not the relaxed, free-flowing jaws bouncing here and there Bolt that we're used to seeing in these situations. And I think that started from Coleman, in obvious alliance with the fact that Coleman at that time, and still is, a bona fide 19.8 sprinter. So he's not somebody who was going to get off to a fast start and then you can expect him to capitulate and you're just going to run by him. And while all of this was going on and these two titans were battling it out in the middle of the track, there was Justin Gatlin out of the fray, just running a blinder in lane 8 to steal the title away from the two gladiators in the middle. So I do think a start such as that, and I am by no means putting Bouwahjgie Nkrumie just yet into the same category of starter as a Christian Coleman, who I do believe, as evidenced by his 60-meter world indoor record, numerous settings and resettings of that record, is the best men's starter going around by a mile. Consistently, he gets out of those blocks faster than anybody else. Now, getting back to that 2017 100-meter final, I do think that a fast start is the ultimate instrument of psychological warfare in the men's 100 meters. Because if we go back a little bit further, a couple of hours prior to the semifinals of the 100 meters, where Bolt again was lined up, in the same semi with Christian Coleman, and Christian Coleman absolutely blitzed the start. I do think that planted a seed of doubt in Bolt's mind because he had to run back a long way after another sluggish start. He had a series of sluggish starts at that championship, but he had to run a long way back, and he came back into the mix, shut it down, wasn't going full out 100%. But I think that planted a seed of doubt, and he realized that if I allow this youngster to get out on me like that, that may be all she wrote. Now, in the aftermath of that race, there were interviews given by Bolt where he indicated, and rightly so, that the bad start was the main problem that contributed to his defeat in that particular race. Now, as we know, the men's sprints in particular are drenched in bravado, braggadocio, and machismo. So while the start was bad, you don't expect, especially a great champion like Bolt, but any sprinter for that matter, because you're ceding a bit of a psychological advantage when you admit that, hey, my competitor's start was such that it really caused me to panic. I was concerned about it and it affected my execution. You're putting yourself at a psychological disadvantage relative to your competitors, especially the one you're acknowledging, has a type of start or any element of the race that causes you concern. So don't expect any 100-meter sprinter to admit something like that. But that's just my personal view as it relates to that particular situation. That Christian Coleman's start was what really threw the spanner in the works. So I was doing some research for another thing, have a lot of interest in sports, have an interest specifically at this time in the NFL, with the NFL draft coming up and being a supporter of the Green Bay Packers. So I was doing some research about edge rushers or, outside linebackers, defensive ends, who, I hope that the team will select one this go around. And I happened to come across a very interesting feature on Cliff Averill. Now, Cliff Averill, for the uninitiated, is a former defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks. Well, most prominently for the Seattle Seahawks, won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks back in the day. Now, in this particular case and in this clip that I'm going to show you, it's a matchup, a race of sorts between Cliff Averill and an offensive tackle by the name of Jordan Mills. Now, though they are lined up across from each other, as opposed to side by side, as two sprinters would be in a real race, this is, for all intents and purposes, a would-be race. Now, Averill's primary objective is to get to the quarterback. In this case, that's Tyrod Taylor of the Buffalo Bills, and to do so as quickly as he possibly can. Meanwhile, Mills, in the simplest of terms, is trying to get into position to erect a barrier with his body, which is pretty much all he has, between Averill and his target as fast as he can. In track and field, as we know, the race starts with the firing of the starter's pistol. In football, on the other hand, things get going when the center snaps the ball. Now, as you can see, it's as if Averill is shot out of a cannon. Think Christian Coleman 2017 in that World Champs 100-meter final and the semi that preceded it. Now, what we term the start in track and field is generally referred to by a lot of football fans as his get off. So Averill's get off is absolutely electric, and that I said I would liken to a start. And a start obviously is much more than just the reaction time. It's about your drive phase and other elements that come together to contribute to the making of that start. So his get off, his start is so dynamic that he's basically rounded the outside shoulder, in this case, the right shoulder of the tackle Mills, before he can even get out of his stance. Think clearing the starting blocks in track and field terms. So at this point, as detailed in the following analysis by Bradley Sowell, and he's someone who played tackle in the NFL, Mills' position, for a number of seasons, including one in 2016 when he was a teammate of Avril's. And so the two, you would imagine, would have gone at it quite often in practice. So he knows what Cliff Avril is all about. And he knows the type of first step quickness that Avril has and the speed that he can generate getting around that edge.
He has a very good first step, and he can make you panic if the right tackle's late. I mean, he's before the tackle even takes his first step. Cliff is already at his shoulder. It was over by then.
Taylor steps up, he gets hit, he goes down. Get in there is Cliff Avril.
So Mills is placed in a really precarious position. You know, there's a threat of a holding penalty, because if he subsequently turns and holds Avril after he clears his right shoulder, invariably a holding penalty is going to be called. So that is there dangling over his head like the proverbial sword of Damocles. Mills is pretty much done, you know, and he pretty much accepts defeat by allowing Avril to proceed unobstructed, essentially, to sack Taylor. You know, much like some sprinters, maybe an Asafa Powell back in the day, would, after realizing that they've been beaten, and they just, you know, stroll across the line. So essentially that's what we see represented there. But the interesting thing for me is what Bradley Sowell said in his analysis. Panic. Mills panicked. And that is the effect that most sprinters obviously won't acknowledge, but I think panic is what a start as electric as a Bouwahjgie Nkrumie's could produce in a high pressure situation like that of a national 100-meter final in June. Now, I do plan to follow up with a part 2 to this particular video where I will take a closer look at the likely competitors in a 100-meter final at nationals in June, the main contenders, and how they stack up potentially against a fully fit and firing Bouwahjgie Nkrumie, and what Bouwahjgie Nkrumie's electrifying start, the effect and impact that that could potentially have on the races and the prospects for making the team of each of the top contenders. But I'll get to that a little bit closer to the time as time permits. So if you're interested in this type of content, highly speculative content, consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and sharing the video with a friend or two. Thanks, as always, for sparing the time to listen to my ramble. And I do hope that you will come back for part 2 of this particular video and the other content, exciting content that is in the pipelines to be released soon on Mondo Musings. Thanks, as always, for checking it out. I'm your host, Nicardo McLean, and I'll catch you next time. Godspeed.